I started the Real Mental podcast because it bugs me when film and TV miss the mark about how mental health gets portrayed. Real Mental is a podcast where a film-loving psychiatrist, that's me, talks to a film critic to help people figure out their lives by getting to the truth about mental health in the movies. Welcome, Christy Lemire, to the Ruthless Compassion / Real Mental podcast. It's great to have you here today to talk about everything, everywhere, all at once.
You're so nice to ask. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, before we start, I thought maybe you could just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
I'm a longtime film critic. I've been doing it for nearly 25 years at this point. I am based in Los Angeles, but I lived in New York for a while as well. And I am just lucky to write about and talk about the topic that I love. I have loved movies since my earliest days. I grew up here in LA. My parents were both huge movie fans, and they provided me with a really great education between the two of them. My mom was super into foreign language films and would drive like 40 minutes out of her way to the video store that had better foreign titles. My dad was super into James Bond, John Wayne, Humphrey Bogart, all that kind of classic stuff, classic musicals, that kind of thing. And so I learned a lot from the two of them and became the film critic for the Associated Press in 1999. They had never had a film critic. I started writing reviews for them back then and was in New York for them for a while, and have now been a freelancer for about 10 years. And we have a podcast of our own and a YouTube channel of our own called Breakfast All Day. I write for RogerEbert.com. I do a ton of radio and just lots of podcasts like yours. So it's a pleasure to be here.
It's wonderful. Well, you definitely have your bona fides. So we're going to really be able to digest this incredible meal of a film.
Yes.
So why don't you get started and why don't you talk about your impression of this very interesting and unusual movie?
Well, so funny. I feel very differently. My feelings about it have evolved over time. When I first saw Everything Everywhere All at Once about a year ago, it premiered at South by Southwest in Austin, and then there were screenings all over the place. And I saw it, and there was all this hype around it. And I was impressed by the daring of it. I was impressed by like the visual language of it and how just weird and wild and constantly surprising you it is. When you see as many movies as I do, you kind of can get a sense of, oh, this is going to go in this direction. I've seen this story before. I've seen these tropes before. I truly never knew where the Daniels were going with Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's alive and it's surprising. And I appreciated it from a craft perspective, but I didn't love it. I felt like it got repetitive and it dragged as it went along. It is over 2 hours long. It's like 2:20, something like that. And then it became this huge hit, right? People kept going back and seeing it over and over again because, as you say, it is a meal. It is so dense. I mean, given the bagel motif, it literally is a meal at some points. And I'm like, what am I missing? Like, everyone loves this movie. Why don't I love it? And then it went on to get like nearly a dozen Oscar nominations, and it won 7 Academy Awards. It won Best Picture, Director, Screenplay, Actress, Supporting Actor, Supporting Actress, Editing, Screenplay. I think I said that twice. Anyway, yeah. 7, a whole lot. Totally dominant in a way that a movie has not been in a long time. And what's exciting about that is that it's so not Oscar bait. A phrase I don't like, but it's so not the kind of movie that it usually wins those kind of Oscars. Can I say the words butt plug?
Absolutely.
There are butt plugs. There's a whole running motif with like sex toys and BDSM. Like, it's bold. Like, a movie like The Fabelmans usually wins. And the fact that this kind of really daring storytelling was so embraced by so many people was exciting. And it kept art houses afloat all last spring and all into the summer. I think a lot of theaters were just coming back from the pandemic about a year ago. They're still really recovering from being closed for a long time. And this is a movie that kept those theaters alive. And so for that reason alone, I love it. I went back and rewatched it over the weekend in preparation for this with my husband and my son, who is 13. And I really appreciated it more this time. We can get into the plot, I guess, in a bit, but like I appreciated the care in the craft that it's so big and brash, but there's great detail, great care in the small details, like the motifs that carry through the whole way, whether it's like introducing the idea of the circle in various visual ways, little bits of dialogue from the early part that come back later on, the whole thing with the rocks I found quite moving. So I liked it. I still have some reservations about the length. I think it gets overlong toward the end, that whole conversation. I won't spoil it for you guys who haven't seen it. I'm guessing a lot of folks may have not seen it. There's a long conversation that occurs in a parking lot at the end that I found just kept going and going and going. I'm like, all right, we get it, wrap it up. But I think I admired it a lot more this time. And I appreciate that despite the extreme weirdness of this story, that at its core, it's about family and it's about understanding and it's about the thing that your whole series is about, which is compassion, trying to understand what it feels like to live in somebody else's shoes, somebody else's life, and try to overcome those barriers that separate us, especially generationally, like when you're a teenager or you're in college and you feel like your parents don't understand you, to get over those resentments and to really see somebody like Evelyn's family really, truly, finally sees her. Like that's quite moving and that's quite universally relatable. So I do understand why it resonated with so many people.
Yeah, I agree with you. There were parts of the movie that I also found challenging. And I was saying to somebody after I watched it that it felt like it could have been more tightly edited and it felt a little bit self-indulgent. Like they were having so much fun. They didn't want to cut anything.
Mm-hmm.
And, like you have to be ruthless. So this, I'm always about ruthless compassion. And the ruthless part is like, kill your babies, right? You have to, if you're an artist, you have to cut even
Mm-hmm.
things you love if it doesn't necessarily fit. So I think they required a little bit more ruthlessness in the editing process. But I felt like the thing I loved the most about it was how this nerdy husband, who you kind of think of at the very beginning as what a loser, and then you get to see different sides of him through the different multiverses, but also just who he is as a person and how kind he is and how he preaches, be kind. And I love that about him because that's definitely my brand.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like that's such an important message for us today. How, something as simple as kindness can really be transformative and incredibly powerful. And
Yeah.
I love that.
It'd be easy to overlook Wayman, wouldn't it? Because he seems meek and he seems passive. He seems like he's a doormat and he never really has the answers. And from the get-go in that relationship, her family didn't approve of him. So there's that, like that barrier, like they're never going to really see him for who he is, but through the multiverse, she can see the romantic side of him. She can see the heroic side of him. She can see the ass kicking side of him. So that's a lot of fun. And I'm so thrilled that Ke Huy Quan won the Oscar for that, because that's a fantastic story. He won for us, for our LA Film Critics Association Awards, he won Best Supporting Actor. He won like everything you could possibly win the whole way through award season. And it's a nice story. And he just seems like so genuinely thrilled to be back in the conversation, 40 whatever years after Goonies and Indiana Jones. So.
And he did a really good job. Like he deserved it. He really,
for sure.
He did a really smashing job, playing all those different aspects of himself. One of the other things I really liked about the film was its portrayal of a certain kind of depression in the young daughter. It wasn't your typical kind of depression. And I don't think a lot of people understand that kind of depression, which is like very angry depression, kind of nihilistic depression, where that line, I don't care about anything, nothing matters, right? That depression that was, that infected Evelyn's character for a little while. And she was going on a little bit of a rampage, right? Sort of destroying the things around her. But that kind of depression, I think, was very well portrayed because it's not something we talk about a lot. Most people think you're depressed, you get sad, you shut down, you don't want to do anything. But there are people who get very angry and very nihilistic and even destructive to themselves and to others when they're depressed that way. And I think that was well done. And, obviously they must have known somebody who had that, because it's not a well-known kind of depression.
Is that how you interpret the various kinds of angry incarnations of her character, where she's Jobu. Is it Jobu? I'm blanking on her name. Jojo Tabuki, whatever her name is. Is that how you interpret that, as like an angry manifestation of depression?
Yeah, that's how I saw it. And because she was saying, I don't care about anything. I don't, nothing matters. And I want, what she was saying is, I want you to feel the way I feel. I want you to see how I feel, that nothing matters. And then, Evelyn did for a little while, until I think her husband saved her and helped her to come back into, kindness and compassion. So I think for me, that was how I saw the daughter, not as just this evil creature, but this,
Right.
this depression that kind of became this malevolent energy.
It's beyond sullenness, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Beyond just usual youthful rebellion. And I guess that's how you can interpret her going into the bagel, right? Like, I don't think you can interpret it specifically in a literal way as suicide. I mean, I guess you could, but I viewed it more like there's going to be a permanent estrangement. Like, once I cross this threshold, there's no going back. That's how I interpreted the bagel at the end.
I'm not sure if I thought of it as an estrangement. I actually thought of it as kind of like annihilation.
Okay.
Yeah, because when you get like into that angry depression, you just want to go down, and you want to take everyone and everything down with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what that character was doing. She wanted to go down, and she wanted to take everything with her, because she was so angry and everything was so meaningless. She felt, what's the point of anything?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing should exist because nothing matters. And, people who get really depressed feel that everything is meaningless and feel that nothing matters. And sometimes they're suicidal, and sometimes they're homicidal. Sometimes they feel like they're going to take everyone down around them. That's where we get these murder suicides, right? They feel like nothing matters, and nobody matters, and they lose their empathy, and they lose their compassion, and they just they become this sort of destructive force. It's like it becomes like a black hole, where they just suck everything into them, which was what the bagel was, right? This sort of. So I really felt like they captured a very specific type of this nihilistic sort of depression. And, it's a very dark energy. And, and a lot of us never see it depicted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or we see it depicted in a very sensational form. And although the film was very dramatic, I think they were quite honest in the way they depicted this kind of mental state.
And I wonder too, if like generationally and culturally, she would feel ambivalent or reluctant to get any kind of help, right? Like, clearly she can't go to her mom and talk about her feelings. Her mom is all business. And you see it in her father. He's all business. Like, there's no talking about your feelings. There's no room for vulnerability. And I wonder if she saw that in them and felt like, well, there's no point. They're never going to listen.
Yeah. And I also think that, you talked about how it's ultimately a film about family. And I agree, because it's a dysfunctional family, on steroids, obviously. But yeah, this young girl, well, she's not so young. She's probably in her 20s, but she's young in her spirit, right?
Yeah.
She's not well formed yet. And she's, in some ways, she's taking after her mother, who's lost. Mom is lost, and then daughter is lost. And, the daughter can't ask her mother for help, for sure, because she doesn't feel like mom understands or respects her or appreciates her or sees her. Can't ask her grandfather because he's critical and judgmental and kind of rigid. And I guess dad, she doesn't even think about. He doesn't factor in. Like, nobody takes him seriously, poor guy, right? He's too nice, right? And so she's kind of the auntie. The daughter is the auntie of the dad, right? The dad is like all nice, and the daughter is all like rage. Right.
Yeah.
All this, like sullenness to the nth degree, to the point of like, violence and destructiveness. And mom is oblivious, right? She's just completely oblivious. She's just like, she's caught up in her own crazy stuff, all her hobbies that she mistakes for careers and her tax problems. Right. So yeah, it's a really dysfunctional family, but yeah, they can't turn to each other. It's so sad, right? Nobody, the husband doesn't want to get divorced, but he feels like he can't reach out to his wife. Wife certainly, is clueless about where the husband's at, and clueless about where her daughter's at, and just wants to make her father approve of her.
Yeah. Yeah. And he never did, and he never will. And I think Evelyn has to resign herself to that. I'm going to need to find self-esteem within myself. right? My parents they never gave it to me and they won't now, right? It's too late for that. So she's got to figure out what matters to her and who she truly is on her own terms. And the multiverse shows her that.
Yeah, it's an interesting trope to give like all these different alternate possibilities
Mhm.
so that we can see different sides of ourselves. There's an exercise in Gestalt where it's called the chair work, where you
Mhm.
sit in a chair and you portray different aspects of yourself, right? It's usually not, a multiverse version, but it's like a
Mhm.
child version or a teenage version or the critical parent version, and you get to kind of have a dialogue with this different version of yourself and gain insights into yourself. And it's very helpful because it gives you some objectivity and some perspective. And in this film, they use that kind of ability to see different versions of yourself as a learning tool, as a growth tool. And I thought that
Mhm.
was a really cool trick to use in cinema.
Yeah, and I think that is also part of what makes this movie so relatable, although it seems so bizarre superficially. I mean, anybody can relate to that. Who among us has not asked ourselves, like, what if I hadn't gone on that date with this guy? Or what if I had gone to this university and not that university? Like, what kind of career would I have had? What if I had taken this apartment and lived on this block? Like, we've all done that. And this movie allows Evelyn to explore that for herself as well. So there's a sort of tantalizing kind of wish fulfillment element to being able to explore those possibilities.
For sure. So I want to ask you two questions. So what was your favorite thing about the film, and what do you think was a part of the film that you thought was problematic, that didn't work as well as it might have?
I love the stuff with the rocks. I found that quite moving the second time around, even more so because they have laid the groundwork by that point for this relationship and how fraught it is and how they're just so unable to communicate, that the fact that when they finally settle down and take a breath and allow for some silence and just the ultimate simplicity of all the multiverse possibilities, this is the simplest of all, the most stripped down. When they finally talk to each other and listen to each other, like, and the subtitles are so funny, like the ha 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 of them cursing, like it's really sweet. And you need to have all of the wild, like pew 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 stuff before then to get to that moment and take that breath. So it's quite it's deceptive, you've gone on this ride with them and you don't realize how well you've gotten to know them until that moment where they are truly just the simplest version of themselves. So I found that quite moving. I like that a lot. The last scene in the parking lot just goes on too long. Like, I feel like they convey the sentiments they have to convey, and then they just keep talking. Like, I felt like it's very satisfying, but it just keeps going. And it's a weird kind of contrast with how zippy the pacing is prior to this. This won the Oscar for editing, and deservedly so, because you have to be able to visually and emotionally follow where she is in each place. So whether it's the quick edits, or it's like the matte cut where she's like moving her hand in one verse and that takes her to the next, like, it's really precise and it's really cohesive, and that's so important. But then we get to the end and it just keeps going. And so that is, from both watchings I had, that is still a reservation I have, where it's like, all right, come on already. What did
Yeah,
you
that's
think?
yeah, I think that they didn't trust the audience enough
Mm-hmm.
to just, they didn't trust our intelligence enough that we would get it. And sometimes when we belabor the point, it's because we don't trust the people on the receiving end of the message, right? We
Mm-hmm.
feel like we have to say it more than once, maybe 3 times or 5 times until, we're sure that maybe they get it then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also really love all the costume design, all the production design. Everything Stephanie Hsu wears is not just beautiful, but like really incredibly detailed. Like, a lot of thought went into creating every single one of those outfits, all of the makeup and hair design, to make them all really distinct from each other, but also just cohesive as far as them all being versions of the same character who's so destructive. So I really appreciated all of that. And on second viewing also, I picked up on little details in the production design, like within the clutter of the apartment. It looks like it's just a total mess, but there are little details here and there that we will see over and over again, like a receipt with a big circle on it, or like someone will catch their reflection in a side mirror, like a round side mirror. Like, we're getting the googly eyes on the laundry bags early. So all of that stuff, I really appreciate the care that went into all of it.
Yeah. And I love the circle motif because, the circle is about wholeness.
Hmm.
And this family was far from whole. The people were far from whole and the family was far from whole. And
Hmm.
I think the movie was this journey toward wholeness,
Hmm.
right? Toward becoming whole as a family and toward becoming whole as individuals. The dad figure, Waymond, was able to like find more of the balance, right? That yin and yang, which, if you think of the yin and yang symbol, it's two squiggly shapes
Hmm.
that make a circle, right? And so he was a little too of the soft of the yin, and then he got his yang and he became
Hmm.
more whole. The daughter was just so angry and hurt, and she was able to find her balance and become more whole and just a little bit more open and less rejecting and nihilistic. And
Hmm.
mom was able to soften because she was so hard and defensive and didn't listen to anybody. And so she was able to soften up and find her balance and be more whole. And even that crazy, you know, tax lady was able to be more whole and more human. She wasn't just this functionary pushing papers and making people's lives miserable. She actually found some humanity as well. And, through Waymond's act of kindness and just talking to her, right, she was able to be more whole as well. So I think that circle really symbolizes
Hmm.
wholeness. And this film was about like this journey toward, wholeness and balance and not like the empty zero, but this like sort of yin yang complete full wholeness.
Yeah, and there's a literal fracturing that occurs. Like the first time that Evelyn gets like sucked back in the chair, there's like a glass has shattered and there's like pieces like a prism, like it's refracted. And so there's a literal shattering that occurs. And then there has to be a coming together afterward too. So yes, a lot of heavy symbolism visually going on here.
And actually, when I think about that kind of fracturing in terms of mental health, sometimes when we get really stuck in these dysfunctional patterns of thinking or behaving or just ways of looking at things, we get very rigid and we can't see a way to change. And sometimes there has to be like a kind of a fracturing, some kind of very dramatic thing that happens. Not always.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's very gradual and gentle, but sometimes there has to be this kind of almost this identity break where a person says, I don't know who I am anymore. If I'm not that way,
Mhm.
I don't know who I am anymore. And I say, well, you have to be able to just be okay with not knowing because you're still here, right? You're still
Mhm.
existing, even if you don't know. So don't worry, you'll figure out who you are as you carry on. You don't need to know right now. But they get really freaked out because they've lost their identity. They've lost who they thought they were, and it hasn't been replaced by somebody new. So there really is a fracturing of their identity,
Mhm.
which is actually what enables them to be free and to find a new way of being, a new way of looking at the world, a new way of behaving, a new way of receiving things. So she had to be fractured.
Mhm.
She had to be broken in order to transform into something, a different version of her that worked better.
Right. This way of life can't go on for any of them, right? They're all like pushing aside what matters. They're all busying themselves with work and a party and friends and anything else. Like, but to sit down and really like look each other in the eye and have honest conversations. And so this crazy adventure forces them to finally do that.
It's yeah, and I love that point that you're making because that
Mhm.
that is so universal, right? How we get
Mhm.
so preoccupied with the stuff that's not important, and the important stuff is like staring us in the face, and we're doing everything we can to ignore it,
Mhm.
right? Like the family is falling apart, and and their business is about to go under. They're in this state of ultimate crisis, and all they want to do is have a party for the father, for the grandfather. The daughter is on the verge of suicide or homicide or something. Everything is about to like explode, and they're just focused on this silly party. It's so typically human, right? Like how the world is exploding. Climate change is destroying the planet, but we need to go to the grocery store and buy those sunflower seeds on sale. Right? It's like so important.
Well, she can control the party, right?
Yeah.
She can't control her daughter. She can't make her husband more attentive. She can't make her father love her, but she can decorate the laundromat in a pretty festive way. And that gives her a sense of control and peace, at least for the moment, right?
And what you're saying is exactly what we do, right?
Mhm.
We feel helpless around the important things, so we find something unimportant
Mhm.
where we can feel empowered. Except it's deceptive because it's not really power. Like being able to decorate the laundromat gives her nothing. So, and that's where we get into trouble, right? We put all this energy into things that we can control that are meaningless
Mhm.
when we need to figure out ways to put our energy into things that will actually improve our situation.
I'm guilty of that kind of thing though. Like I'll
We all
vacuum
are.
instead of like working. Like, oh, there's a piece of dirt right there. I've got to go get to it right now. I know I'm on deadline, but like I got to throw a little laundry in.
Oh, my house was never so clean as when I was writing my first book. Never. Spotless, spotless, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's really funny.
But I love the fact of that, although as you were saying, this movie is it's so wild and wacky, and yet there are such simple truths about humanity in there. And if you're not distracted by all the colors and all the fast cutting, you can sort of absorb these really important messages about kindness and about wholeness and about focusing on the important stuff, which is love and kindness and people, and not focusing on the silly stuff that we tend to get preoccupied with.
Yeah, I think it really requires more than one viewing. I know this movie is not for everyone. I've had so many friends say to me, like, oh, I watched the first hour of it and I could not get into it. I could not get past it. It's just too weird. But if you do watch it more than once, it is a really rich and rewarding experience because you pick up on the details and the themes. And I feel like the first time through, you're just sort of disoriented, like, what am I even watching here? And the second time, you can kind of settle into it and appreciate the performances more, appreciate the depth of it more.
Well, if you can almost see it as an experimental film, right?
Mm.
And it's there's a lot to unpack, and people get overstimulated, which you'd find kind of strange in this day and age with so much stimulation. But even
Yeah.
so, I think it's very, very stimulating, and maybe to its own detriment in a way, although it didn't prevent it from winning a lot of awards. But
Mhm.
it they might have slowed it down by 5%, or just taken out 5% of the stimulation, just to, give people a little bit of a break. That's probably why you like that rock scene, because it's like a breather for the
Ah.
audience too, right? Not just for the two characters who are talking or not talking. But,
Yeah.
I think when we get overstimulated, it's hard for us to see the forest for the trees. So that, I think, might have been a fault in this film. And again, I think the filmmakers were having such a good time. Maybe they couldn't resist just packing more stuff into it rather than like cutting a few things. But yeah, I think if people can give it a chance and see it again, or even watch it at home on
Mhm.
streaming, and then pause it, think about it, go back to it, then I think they'll be able to grasp the most important messages, which are the very human messages.
Right, and not be on your phone. Don't look at your phone. Turn your phone off and put it away in a different room. I think that maybe people have a hard time focusing all their attention on a 30-minute TV episode or a 2-hour-long movie. Like, this is a movie that really rewards you paying attention. You cannot look away. You can't be like scrolling through Twitter and looking at everything everywhere, because you'd be like, wait a minute, why are we now in an alley in a Wong Kar-wai film? Like, what is happening? So you got to
And
pay
she's in
attention.
an evening gown and he's in a tuxedo. Yeah.
How'd that happen? I love how they incorporate like actual Michelle Yeoh stuff into that segment. Like that whole quick cross-cutting includes her like on the red carpet for Crazy Rich Asians. Like it's very cute. The very overdue Michelle Yeoh worship has been a nice thing to see with this film.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you're making a really great point here, which is that this film does require your attention. And there's a lot of stuff that's out these days that you can look at your phone while you're watching the
Mhm.
movie and you're not going to miss too much. But this is not that kind of an
Yeah.
experience. You have to be focused and you have to be present and you have to be really listening. And maybe that's also a meta message for the
Mm.
film. It's like, if you want
Mm.
to benefit from this experience, you have to give it your full attention and not be distracted by other devices or conversations. That you have to really be there 100%.
Yeah, for sure. I refer to those as like movies to fold laundry to. Like, this is not a movie to fold laundry to. You need to pay attention to it. Many things are. Dumb romantic comedies on Netflix. You can like fold your laundry while you're watching it and not miss a thing.
You're right. Yeah. This one, you blink and it's like there's a scene that you miss. There's a whole character
Whole
arc.
verse.
Yeah. Exactly. A whole universe that you somehow didn't see. It's true. No, it's and I think you're right. Maybe it's one of those films you have to watch a couple of times because we tend to be so distracted lately that even when we think we're watching it, we're spacing out, we're thinking about, what we're making for dinner. And then we're like, so we might be missing parts of it anyway. So watching it a second time, will reinforce the things we liked and also fill in some of the gaps if we hadn't been paying our full attention to it.
For sure.
Well, it's really fun to talk to you about this movie because it's such a crazy movie. What did you think about those like you were saying, like butt plugs and those like risks that they took, right? Like, how did you feel about that? Like, did you go like, wow, that's really daring? Or did you go, yay, that's really cool? Or both?
I thought it was funny that the little trophies are shaped like butt plugs and that Deirdre is so clearly oblivious to that. She just thinks that they're really important, like manifestations of her greatness at the IRS or whatever, but it's shaped like a butt plug, and that's really funny. The thing with the BDSM room, like, I don't know, is it trying too hard to shock us? That guy is one of the two directors. That's Daniel Scheinert. Both of the Daniels are in this in various places, but that's Daniel Scheinert being whipped and having the ball gag and all that stuff. It was a trip watching those parts with my son. I had forgotten about that when I said, let's all sit down as a family and watch Everything Everywhere All at Once. Thankfully, that went over his head and he did not ask any questions about that. I'm not ready for that conversation just yet. He's 13, almost 14, and he's seen a whole lot more movies than most people his age because he's my son and he's my frequent +1 to movies. But yeah, that was just, I think, but I think they weren't trying to like kink shame him. I think they weren't trying to like judge him. I think it's just like, that's just one more way of life.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that they were just sort of putting everything into the soup, every single ingredient.
Onto the bagel.
Yeah, it's an everything bagel. No, you're right. And they put, a lesbian relationship. They put BDSM. They put butt plugs. They put everything. They put, ratatouille with a raccoon. They put everything in there. Right? They put Chinese musical theater. They put martial arts. Like they're trying to like create their own universe. When they said everything everywhere all at once, they weren't joking.
I had totally forgotten about the Raccacoonie part of it until I rewatched it. Like, there's a whole section of it that I just had blanked from my mind. And so that was amusing to see that all over again. My son liked that part. That was silly.
It was silly. And yet when she got into her nihilistic, when she approached the bagel, Evelyn, and she got into her nihilistic phase and she pulled the chef's hat off her colleague and exposed the raccoon, and the raccoon was taken away by animal control, and the guy was devastated, right? And then it flips scenes and the husband is saying, be kind, and she realizes that she has to remedy the situation. So she goes back in that universe and she helps to rescue the raccoon for her colleague. That was a beautiful scene because it shows that she did something bad, she did something hurtful, and then she made the effort to fix it, right? That's
a very good point. Yes, it seems like it's silly because it's like a stupid-looking animatronic raccoon, but yeah, there's deeper meaning there.
That was his little buddy that was really important to him, right? That was like, that raccoon was his companion animal, and he, it's like his pet, and he felt devastated, and so she fixed it. And I think that that's something we need to recognize, that when we cause harm, when we're in a bad place and we cause harm, that we should make an effort to fix the situation that we caused harm to. She was making amends, she was making reparations, and I think that was a really important point. And then she was making reparations in a few situations. She was patching up a lot of the harm that she did, like when she went to her dad and said, this is my daughter's girlfriend, right? Like she was fixing some of the harm that she had done, and she realized that she had to. And I think that movie was very explicit in saying, you mess up, okay, we're not going to judge you, but go fix what you messed up. Go make reparations. And so much of the time we just go, oh, sorry, sorry. And we think that's enough. And I don't personally feel that's enough. I feel like, we should spend more of our time trying to fix the mistakes that we've made. It's okay to make mistakes. We're human, but let's try to make up for it. Let's try to fix it. Let's do more than just, say sorry. Let's try to make amends.
Yeah. And that actually carries over to Deirdre, the IRS lady.
Yes.
When you see where her harsh shell comes from, right? Why she's bitter, why she's angry at the world. You see, she's been taking it out on her, tax-paying citizens of Los Angeles for all this time. Then she softens too, and she's more open-hearted, and she's willing to give them more time, another chance to get it right, so that the spirit of that carries over to her.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that's one of the reasons why this film was so successful, because we're talking about not just a family that needs to be fixed, but we're talking about ways that human beings can change and become better versions of themselves, kinder, more loving, more soft, more open, and making more of an effort to patch things up that we've caused harm to. I think that's a really good message for humanity, because we can get angry. It's okay. We can be destructive. We can make mistakes, but this movie is really encouraging us to take that next step and to try to fix things. And that's a great call to action if you're weaving that into a film, not sort of shoving it down people's throat, but just weaving that call to action into a piece of art. It's like, be a better version of yourself. There are many versions of yourself, but do better, be kind, and also fix the things you broke, or at least try.
Yeah, it's very affirming. And I think also the place and time where we are, societally, we look at the movies that have won Best Picture the last couple of years during the pandemic, like this and Coda, are heartwarming, family-affirming films that serve as a balm during uncertain times, right? I think that nothing ever exists in a vacuum, and I think the films that resonate are a result of what's happening in our world. And so you have two really extremely different movies, but movies that ultimately are about families communicating and coming together and coming to an understanding.
Yeah, and that's very reassuring, because they could have been just these nihilistic, dark. There's like, it could have been a film like Succession, right? It's like nihilistic, dark things where you don't like any of the main characters, you can't relate to anyone, and everyone's behaving horribly, and that's kind of the opposite. It's the anti-Succession, what's winning at the Oscars. So that's reassuring, because it gives us hope in humanity, and hope that these are things that we do aspire to.
Right. This was not my favorite movie of the 10. Like, I loved Banshees of Inisherin. Like, I would have picked that. I love Tar. I love Cate Blanchett's performance in Tar, but like, that's a cold, hard, cynical movie. Like, where she ends up, that is not affirming or heartwarming at all. I'll come back and we'll do all the Best Picture nominees. But like, I can see why in the realm of all of those, like something heartwarming, like Everything Everywhere, definitely wins the day.
For sure. Well, Christy Lemire, before we wind up, I want to ask, where can people find you if they're interested in seeing the kind of work that you do, reading about your reviews and learning about you?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So I co-host a YouTube channel and podcast called Breakfast All Day with a longtime friend and fellow critic, Alonzo Duraldi. We've been doing that together in various forms for about 14 years. I write for RogerEbert.com. You can find a lot of my reviews there. I am on Twitter at Christy Lemire. Come find me there. We also have Breakfast All Day. At BeFast All Day is our Twitter and our Instagram. You can find us there. We also have a Patreon, a Breakfast All Day Patreon, where we do movie reviews, but also a lot of television. So we just did The Last of Us. Speaking of challenging viewing, we just did The Last of Us. We always do The Handmaid's Tale. We're in the middle of The Mandalorian right now. We're in the middle of Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso's feel good for your audience. And then we do a cool thing once a month called Off the Menu, where we give people a poll with maybe 5 films on a different topic, whether it's like a romance for Valentine's Day for February, or this month we're honoring Roger Ebert because it's been 10 years since Roger Ebert's death. We picked 5 movies that he hated. And so our people picked Blue Velvet for us to watch. So, but that was awesome. But Roger hated it. So we're going to go back and rewatch that. And so we have a lot of different ways to find us. So Breakfast All Day, if you look for that anywhere, you will find us in various forms.
And I'm going to take you up on your offer, and I'm going to ask you to come back, and we'll do another Oscar-nominated film, because this was really fun talking with you today.
Let's do it. I will talk about any movie with you at any point in time. I'd be honored and happy to do it. So thanks for asking me.
It's a deal. Well, thanks again, Christy Lemire, for coming on the show, and everyone. You're going to have lots to digest from this review as well as from the movie. This is Dr. Marcia Sirota. Thanks for listening to the Real Mental Podcast. Please leave a review and your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter at marciasirotamd.com. While you're at it, why not check out my Ruthless Compassion podcast with over 140 episodes and counting. And if you have any ideas for guests for either Real Mental or Ruthless Compassion podcasts, please email us at info@marciasirotamd.com. Happy listening!